It is true that you become very vulnerable very quickly when you are under stress. And obviously people experience that in all different things outside racing. But for me, that is created when I'm tired, I'm hungry, I'm pretty much exhausted. There's no ego, there's no agenda. People just talk about what they want to talk about. And because of their physical and often their mental state, there just seems to be a lot that comes out. and I think that's a beautiful thing, because, you know, a lot of people are very protective or defensive about their personal lives and about how they really feel and what they really think. And they seem to forget that for some reason when they're out on the trail. And with the stage racing, with the opportunity then to go into camp and spend more time when you're not running with these people, but having already broken down the barriers, it's just beautiful. So the human element is a really big why.
Welcome to the To Be Human podcast, Jamie Hildage.
Hi Jenna, thanks very much for having me on.
No problem. It's such a pleasure to see you, Jamie. So I wanted to start with a quote of yours from your website. It's from your blog a few years ago. I was recently asked why I run these long events, and it is because of this community. Whether it's during the trip to the start camp, camp life itself, or out on the trails when things are going very well or not so, everyone pulls together. We're all competing against each other, but also all suffering the same hardships and struggles. And in my experience, this creates strong and immediate bonds that are more difficult to experience in everyday life. There is little space for ego, and vulnerability is hard to hide. People are raw and fragile, tired, sore, and hungry, and yet these relationships forge more strongly than ever. So, Jamie, talk to me about your why in ultramarathon running and its connection with community.
Sure. You picked that up from quite a while ago.
I did.
My why, I mean, the first time I did it, the first time I ran kind of an ultra was about physical test and running it with one of my friends who just had an idea that he wanted to do one, didn't want to do it on his own, and invited me to join in. And, you know, I'm ever thankful for that opportunity from back then. Now, with the few races under my belt, especially the stage racing, my why is still that community, and even more and more with each race that I do. It is true that you become very vulnerable very quickly when you are under stress. And obviously people experience that in all different things outside racing. But for me, that is created when I'm tired, I'm hungry, I'm pretty much exhausted. There's no ego, there's no agenda. People just talk about what they want to talk about. And because of their physical and often their mental state, there just seems to be a lot that comes out. And I think that's a beautiful thing, because, you know, a lot of people are very protective or defensive about their personal lives and about how they really feel and what they really think. And they seem to forget that for some reason when they're out on the trail. And with the stage racing, with the opportunity then to go into camp and spend more time when you're not running with these people, but having already broken down the barriers, it's just beautiful. So the human element is a really big why. I also think, you know, the distances that you and I run are kind of driving distances, but I think if you sit in a car, you don't really, you don't get the feel of the air and the smell of the ground and that sort of real interaction with the earth that you get when you're traveling on foot. So I think the two of those put together just make a magical experience, and it doesn't matter where it is.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And do you find in life outside of ultramarathon running that it's harder to sort of feel that sense of community and openness between people?
Yeah, it is. I think people who don't race aren't open to it necessarily. That's why I love it. When we catch up, or when I catch up with Lee or catch up with Heather or any of the other running community, that it's like you haven't left. You're straight back into where you were before. But as I say, and I think people do experience that same level of camaraderie if they're in a sports team together, or they're in a tight-knit business together. So it's not just running and it's not just racing, but it's certainly made me more aware of how I behave towards other people, what people really mean when they say something, and just sort of a bit more personal and social awareness, I think, from having those open and honest conversations when you're running. So I've learned a lot from it, and I continue to, and try and encourage other people to have that same experience, albeit not necessarily running long distances, but just
yeah. Because I feel like, because you got into running, that I'm aware of, like more long distance running, around 2015, 2016. Previous to that, because I know that you were in corporate, you were doing 20 years of working in banking as an executive. Did you feel like you missed that sense of, bond with people in that sort of, that life experience before you did this transition?
Do you mean when I went back to corporate world after I'd been running and sort of?
So because that I'm aware, you sort of got more into the long distance running, more passionately, sort of almost within your transition of coming out of corporate, and also that I'm aware coming out of a marriage, it was a big transition change for you. And I know in my life when I was in corporate and I wasn't running, I at times felt quite isolated and alone, and I really lacked that sense of bond and community that I've found since then. Was there a distinct sort of change for you in that transition between you feeling, more isolated and then becoming more part of a community?
Yeah, absolutely. And so you're right. I did start really getting into the long distance running, and sort of taking it a bit more seriously in 2015. And I think partly there I met a bunch of people who I just resonated with, loved spending time with. And for the same reasons as we just discussed, with, the vulnerability, the honesty, there's no pretense, there's no judgment. It's just you go out and run and you struggle with it or you don't, but everyone sort of gets on in the same space. And I think partly I grabbed a hold of that community because it gave me something that I really felt was missing with my work environment. But also I think it gave me back something that I had when I started work and I lost during my corporate life. And that was a sort of, a patience and a tolerance, an empathy and an understanding with people that I'd had through my growing up years, that kind of dissipated through the rigors and the drive, of corporate life, especially in that banking space, where, you don't necessarily have to be very empathetic to get things done. There's just a hierarchy and that's the way it is. Now, when I still step in and out of that corporate world, and have a very, very different approach to the people and to the work. And I feel better with myself about it. And I think I get better results as a consequence of being a little bit more aware of people as people and humans with the same emotional set and the same vulnerabilities, albeit portrayed in a really different way. And I think the running community has really helped me get back to where I want to be on that personal level. And I think that's why really I was driven to be a coach. I saw the benefits in myself, for myself with it, and the the excitement for different things in life and different communications and interactions that probably before I would have been a bit more dismissive of. Now, forefront of everything I do is, the interaction with people and what the outcomes are of that. So, yeah, long answer, but big, yeah, definitely a big change in my entire life on the back of being driven to be a bit more socially friendly, I guess.
Do you find that a common story within doing your executive coaching, that these people that are working in corporate, particularly long term, are kind of coming to this space where they may have started out as this really ambitious and sort of socially conscious and connected person, and then over time, obviously through your job, you've got performance markers you need to meet, that sort of begins to get lost in that path?
Yeah, I think that definitely in the banking space where it's very short-termist, it's kind of like, what do I need to do to get to the end of the year, keep my job, get my bonus, and possibly get promoted or get a new job or whatever it is. There's definitely a bunch of drivers that possibly make you behave in a way that you wouldn't if they didn't exist. If the only interest was keeping the business open and it doesn't matter how much money there is or anything like that, you'd probably make or possibly make different decisions about how you interact with people or the different priorities of work-life balance or even individual pieces of work within a portfolio of work. So I don't know whether, I think the environment drives people's behavior. And I'm not sure, if you see an executive who's very driven, very business focused, not particularly interested in what you did at the weekend or whether you've got a family or anything like that, that doesn't necessarily, in my experience, mean that's how they behave at home. It's just that's the persona that they bring to the office. And I don't, there's one of my big things is, do you behave in the office and with your colleagues in the same way as you would treat your family, your best friends outside of work? And if the answer is no, then I would ask why. They're no lesser human beings that you're dealing with. They have the same, they have different skills, but the same underlying, again, vulnerabilities and personality traits made up in a different way. They're not a great accountant, but they might be a fantastic artist. And I think there's a lot of finding what you're good at to take that pain away from everyday working. But I think the more self-aware people are, the less likely they are to behave in a way that isn't necessarily appropriate or the most productive in a relationship basis. Yeah.
So in speaking about your transition, I'd love to hear more about that time in your life, because I think it's really important, and I can certainly resonate. In my own experience, I had a very similar transition at a lower level. I didn't spend 20 years in my job, but I definitely had a profound shift in my life. And I know that I've connected with many people in them knowing my story, about people that would love to make such a big transition, whether it be job or relationships. I would love to hear more about the courage that you had in making such a big decision in your life, and obviously where that's led you up until this point. Yeah, sure.
Well, you're right. It was 2015. There was the big shift. So I left university and went straight into an American investment bank in London, and I never really gave it a second thought. That sort of paid my bills. There was a natural progression through that as a career path. And I just started following it. And it wasn't really until I got to where I am now and looked back and realized how much that changed me as a person. I learned a lot. I had some fantastic experiences. I worked with some great people literally all over the world. But there was a couple of times, especially when I was married with children, where I wanted to get out. It was too much. I was away a lot. I was traveling a lot. I was starting to question whether, what the benefit was of what I was doing. And then in 2015, I ran the Big Red Run out in the Simpson Desert for the first time. And that was when I met that big bunch of people who just had a different, they may have been stepping out of their everyday life to do that as well. It might not be the way they are ordinarily, but they just very, very strongly resonated. And I got back to Sydney, and work was a chore at that point. I separated from my wife, which, is a very kind of painful experience. And I was made redundant from that work as well. They moved the job, I think, up to Singapore, and it just wouldn't work. But for the first time then, if I'd separated from my wife and thrown myself into work, or I'd lost my job and thrown myself into family, neither of those were there anymore. And I suddenly at that point realized that I hadn't tried to get to where I was in work particularly, or in life, come to that, by design. I'd just sort of, gone along with whatever happened. And when I describe it now, I talk about meandering through life without any goal or any real serious thought about direction. And that for me kind of is the foundation of my crossroads. How do I get myself into some direction? And I didn't have any tools. I didn't know how to work out what I wanted to do or where I wanted to go. I didn't have the job to just look at and go, okay, I'm going to go and work in this other office, or I'm going to take this other direction within work. That just didn't exist. And I think this is right, actually, when we met, because as part of my package for leaving the bank, I got I don't know what it's called, like an outreach or it's kind of get you back into work coach, Peter. So I started coming in and seeing Peter, and just the exercises that we went through made me realize that I didn't really know anything about living and hadn't made any active decisions about who I was or where I was. So that's where the coaching thing really came. And that was when I realized that there's so much value in giving people the time and the space in a framework to allow them to think about where they are and where they want to go. And a lot of the exercises that I did were really kind of alien to me at the time, but now are just the way that I live my life completely. It's like, what do you want from life? Well, I don't know. Well, that's the same question on the other side of what don't you want? Well, endless lists of what I don't want. And by working through those, you come to a situation where, okay, I've described a kind of life that I want. How can I then build that? So I didn't start off saying, hey, I want to be a coach. I started off saying, I don't want to work in an office, and I want to have the time to enjoy with my children and help them grow up. But at the same time, I want to earn some money, and I love my running. So how do you mix all of that together? And seeing Peter help me so much, I was like, well, I want to do that with other people. And that's really where the transition came. So it wasn't really bravery. It was almost like thrown into a situation where I didn't have any control, that then allowed me to have the headspace to realize what it is that I really wanted to do. And I wouldn't change that for anything. The only thing I wouldn't possibly change is having done it a lot earlier. But it's fantastic, and it's changed my running. It's changed the way that I interact with people in my life generally. And, I'm not exactly where I want to be yet, but I've got a direction, I've got a goal, and everything that I do day to day takes me towards that consciously. So it's a good thing. If you're at a crossroads and you're really stuck, ask someone to help you. That's it.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I think it's so important to highlight the idea of making conscious decisions, because I think until we really ask that question, we're quite unaware of how automatic our life can be on a day-to-day basis. And we may be sort of, the norm may be being unhappy or, you know, sort of feeling like you're obligated to all these things that you don't enjoy in your life. And to be able to take a step back and be like, you know what, actually, in all that I'm doing and all the precious time that I'm spending in this world, how many times or in everything that I do have I decided this is exactly what I want to do? I think there's so much power in that, and it's quite a confronting and scary exercise to do, when I think most people realize that just because you've been doing something for so many years doesn't mean it's the thing that you want to be doing and a thing that's good for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
And I find it very interesting because Jamie and I, we did meet around this time, and I was on the other side of the desk doing administration work. And that was sort of my pattern. Was I was a temporary worker, and I would sort of go in and out of different companies in Sydney during university, but then it became a pattern post-university as well, because I would always make money and then go off and travel and spend my money and then come back, and it would be sort of this interesting cycle of coming back into a life that I was incredibly unfulfilled with, but just with the whole purpose and intention of making money so then I could take some time off and do what I was passionate about and what I enjoyed doing. And I think now I'm at a stage very similar to you, Jamie, where I work for myself as a mindset coach. And I think there is something that is very, very important highlighting here about understanding that you can create a life with all that you want. And that obviously primarily does involve working for yourself, which can be a challenge in itself. And I would love to speak to you about that, Jane, because I know that we're sort of similar in the sense of, you know, you come out of being highly skilled in an area and you transition into working for yourself. And then all of a sudden you have to have all these like new skill sets that come into having a business on your own. How has that transition been for you, particularly coming from being an executive in banking, which is very notable, to then sort of, I guess, starting from the ground up in working for yourself?
It's scary. I
agree.
Do you know, so this is kind of where everything comes together with the running, with the executive world, with the coaching. It's scary to do something that you have never done before. It's scary to set yourself a goal or a challenge that you don't know if you can do or not. And going from, you know, there was things that I had to learn over the last 20, 25 years or so of working in the banks. But generally speaking, it was a variation of something I'd done in the past. So it wasn't particularly scary. It was just a case of, you know, read a book or talk to somebody, or in these days, watch YouTube or listen to something on the internet, and you've got the answer. Now, you know, I think you came to the first time I ever did a motivational speech. I was terrified, and it took me 2 years to pluck up the courage to stand on stage in front of people and tell my story, because there's all this stuff going on in your mind of, well, why does anyone want to listen to your story? They've probably done much more than you have. That's not particularly interesting, and they don't really care about it. And it's that kind of inner dialogue that happens when you want to start your own business, when you want to do something you've never done before, when you want to just suddenly go, oh, my first ultramarathon is going to be 527 Ks across the desert. You know, it's like you have to basically stand up and be counted. You know, you set your goal. If it isn't terrifying, is it really worth it as a goal? You know, when you're outside your comfort zone so far and for so long, that's where the growth happens. That's where you start to understand and feel a bit more confident that you actually can do stuff that you didn't know you could. And that's what my entire business has been about for me, and for trying to encourage other people to have their big goals and get them to a position where they go, all right, I've never done it before and it's really scary and it's massive, but I've got a framework that I can make myself comfortable in to be uncomfortable. So you kind of you talk about a comfort zone, you sort of get comfortable with the discomfort. And that's where the growth comes from. And suddenly, I've done a few speeches now and I don't mind. It's kind of fun and, it's scary, but it's scary exciting, not scary, not going to do it. So I think you've got to be prepared to be pushed. You've got to be prepared to push yourself and kind of take a bit of discomfort. But that's magic as well. That's growth and development. And that's kind of how you move forward. And, there are ways of doing it that are less painful than others. You can take smaller steps. You can break it down. You can get help. You can have people around who are supportive and encouraging. You're always going to have people who say, well, why don't you get a full-time job? You'd be much better off doing that. Or why are you changing now? You're nearly 50. You should just stay doing what you're doing. Just don't listen to them. They don't, they're not doing it. If they were doing it, they certainly wouldn't be saying that to you, because the enjoyment of actually achieving something that you didn't know you could do is just another level. That's, I guess, why we're sitting here now, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I know that with your running, you have the mindset strategy of talking about the inner critic and the inner champion.
Yeah.
Do you apply that to all parts of life?
Everything. Again, going back, you stand up and you're going to speak in front of a whole bunch of people, and everything about you is saying, everything in your head is kind of, you're not interesting, you're boring, you haven't got a story. What happens if you mess it up? What happens if you get it wrong? Well, in running, I kind of put that voice into perspective. Yeah, I'll run a bit slower, it's too hot. Or yeah, I'm really tired, but that's what I'm here for. And, if you've got a big enough why, a big enough reason for being there, and the ability to manage that inner voice, it can't stop you doing anything. You go for a new job. If it's a job that you've done before, you're comfortable in that space, you're confident, that comes across. If you go and interview for a job that you've never had before and you don't know if you can get it or not, you're going to have doubt going on in your mind. And it's just rationalizing that. It might be, I've never run a project in this space before and I'm worried about it, and there's other people going to be better at it than I am. But what about all the other experiences you've got? Well, I've run projects in other places, or I've had this experience that maybe someone else hasn't had. And if you can get some context and some rationalization around that negative voice, whether it's running, whether it's new job, whether it's your own business or a relationship, just rationalize it. Why are you doing it? What do you want from it? And you suddenly, I think for me, definitely reflecting on the time that I've spent away from family, the effort that I've put into training, the planning and the preparation for some of these big races. I'm not going to stop because I'm feeling bad for half an hour, a day. There's too much gone into it. And the elation of completing it, exhausted or not, is still there. And you've just got to push.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, to understand that it's a part of being human, to my understanding, and it will always be temporary. And it's just, as you're saying, being able to learn the mindset strategies that enable you in those moments to be able to understand that this is temporary and it's not me. It's just a part of my mind that I can move through and work through and keep going to achieve my goals.
Yeah.
So I had a little look through your Instagram. And I went all the way back to your first picture, which I must say was lovely. I think it was a plate of fruit.
Yeah, it was.
But something that I found very fascinating and beautiful was that so many of your earlier pictures spoke about the idea of freedom. And I think this was around the time that things were changing for you. So I would love to know more about what freedom means to you.
Yeah, freedom. Well, I mean, firstly, to start off, we're very, very fortunate with where we are, in that freedom is just a description or an extension of the way you live. It's not real trying to break out of something that isn't freedom, right? So freedom in that context, where I have virtually all the freedom that you could want in life, is living with choice. So it is choosing what you do, choosing where you do it, choosing when you do it, choosing who you do it with, is all a function for me of freedom. It's about not being forced down a path because of a mortgage to pay, or because of your boss says this is what you're going to do for the next 5 days. It's freedom to manage your own destiny, which again is just a mindset. And the mindset is there are no limits to what I can do if I put my mind to it. So it may be not instant. I do a job now in a bank because it funds the build of the next bit of my business. And that takes away a little bit of my freedom on one hand, because I have an obligation to be at my desk and delivering work, which I do enjoy as it happens, fortunately this time. But it's building freedom on the other hand, because it's enabling me to grow my business. And that business is me working for myself at home with clients that I choose to work with on a topic that I genuinely enjoy, when I want to do it and from where I want to do it. So I'm giving up one aspect of freedom and I'm using it to build a bigger freedom. And I think I see, I might be because I'm getting older, but I think I see a lot more now of people graduating or people growing up with more freedom or more expectation of freedom, where they don't necessarily want to go and sit in a desk for 15 hours a day while they earn their stripes and stay there for 10, 12, 14 years while they go up the corporate ladder. I think that's changing, and I think it's something corporates need to look at and think about with their working tempo and their working organizations. So that's what freedom means to me, and I think it's being adopted more widely as we move through generations. But, yeah.
And I think it's really important to understand that, there is, for most of us, a transition period between potentially something that we feel less freedom in and something that we're working towards that we would label as freedom. And I think it's really important to highlight that there can be freedom in the process. It's not always in that end goal of, okay, when this happens then I'll feel free. It's freedom in the conscious choice of being able to make that choice for yourself, and understand that, yes, sometimes it can take, particularly in working for yourself, it can take years to really build up to where you want to be. But you don't have to feel imprisoned in that process because you're not exactly where you want to be. And to understand that, for people particularly that value growth, that the journey is ever present, and there'll never sort of be that point into which you're like, oh, this is exactly freedom and everything that I've ever expected, because it will just continue to evolve and change.
Yeah, I think so. I completely agree with that. And I think one of the things that I've heard you say is about enjoying the journey, not just the focus on the goal. And I think that's really important in this situation where you're striving for a goal, you're striving for freedom as you see it, but don't neglect to enjoy the bits that you're doing today, because that's part of it. You're not just going to arrive at the goal and go, oh, I've done it, fantastic, now I feel great and everything's fixed. You may have lost 5 years of your time while you were trying to get there. And it's important to grab a hold of all of those little lessons as you go and just push and try. You can't fail at anything. If it doesn't work the way you wanted it to, you've learned something from it. It's not a failure. It's an opportunity to learn, and you maybe change a slight different direction or or try it again in exactly the same way. But it's about learning and the lessons on the journey, not just getting to the end of it, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I definitely agree with you. It's the failure, inverted commas, is the opportunity to learn. And particularly in my journey at the moment, I'm just seeing it as feedback. Like, don't take it personal. Don't make it about you. Most things are skill sets. And if a particular skill that you're applying isn't working in what you're doing, get the feedback, iterate, and try again in a new way, and stop making it about your sense of self-worth.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Love that.
So we're going to take a little turn here and get into the nitty-gritty of the track. Our favorite race.
Yeah, it is.
So you are someone that has done this event twice. Yeah. So I think that you're certainly in good stead to give a little rundown on what it is, but I'm certainly more interested in your journey and your experience of how this has impacted you in running, in your life, and particularly you as a person.
Yeah, sure. You're right. I did it in 2017, and then I came back and did it with you in 2019. So 2017, it was my first self-supported stage race. So I'd ran the Big Red Run twice at that point, in 15 and in 16, and done a whole load of 50K sort of mountain trail races in between. So I went out in 2017, kind of just, at that point in time, there wasn't a lot of information online about what the track was, what the terrain's like, what people used as food, or any of that type of stuff. So really, I spent a long time researching pictures that I could find on the internet that had been taken that were on the Canal Aventure website, and worked out what I thought I would need on that basis. Being self-supported means that you carry everything you need for the entire race in your bag. So that's sleeping bag, sleeping mat, any spare clothes, medical kit, cooking kit, washing kit, half a toothbrush if you decide to take one, and your food. So you're carrying with water around 9.5 kilos, give or take. So it takes a lot of planning to get your head to the point where you're like, okay, I'm going to run 530 Ks, which is one thing. In the sand and across the hills, another thing. In 40-degree heat, another thing. Oh, and then at the end of the day, I'm going to be rationed on water and sleep outside for the rest of it. So there's a lot to get your head around. And I think I wrote recently, and I'm not sure this is exactly true or not, but I wrote that I've never started anything that I didn't think I was going to finish. It's not an expectation that I might get to the end or I might not. It's like, okay, I'm going to go and do this thing. I'm going to finish it. Whether I enjoy it or not is really, I'm going to find out while I'm out there whether I'm fit enough to be there or not, which was a big difference between 17 and 19 in the track. So going out there, and again, just in 2017, it was stinking hot the whole time. It was dry. And we kind of had I think there was 19 different nationalities there, out of about 45 people. And people dropped every day. But it was just breaking it down into small stages, just starting like day by day by day. And then as we progressed and got more and more tired, it was not even a whole day. It was just the next checkpoint, the next checkpoint, the next checkpoint. And then I think, as Heather said, who I had the honor of running with for the last day of the 2019 track, it became not even checkpoint to checkpoint. It was 1K walk, 1K run, 1K walk. And, you just break everything down into its smallest manageable part that you can actually get your head around. I'm just going to move forward for the next K. When I came back from that in 2017, I'd been deep into my mind, far deeper than I'd been in any of my coaching practice. And it was really around keeping going. I tore one of my quads on about day 6 or day 7. And I think I had another 200 and something Ks to go on that. And it was just digging in and kind of looking back at other races that I'd done where they hadn't worked as I'd thought they would, but I'd got to the end, and grabbing a hold of that experience and carrying it to the end. And when I got back from the track, I did the same thing that I'd done out there with everything I was doing in life. So I was trying to set the business up. But instead of then thinking about the entire business, it was like, well, what do I need to learn to launch the next bit of the business? How do I build a website, or how do I host an online course? And it was just a little bit of education each time, which is the same as just doing that stage by stage, checkpoint by checkpoint, step by step. And I took that into life, and really that moved forward a lot what I was doing. The track then, I'd started to get results. So that changed my running. I got sponsored. I kind of got a lot more confidence in the sport itself, which also went into life itself. And then I think 2019, that took a little bit of a tumble, that confidence, that competence wasn't there as much as it was in 17. I didn't do very much between 2017 and 2019 running wise. I was still struggling with kind of get the situation of 2015 was sort of replaying on me a lot. I was in a new world and I was a little bit lost. And sometimes I'd have complete clarity and confidence and driving forward. And other times I'd just feel defeated and beaten. And I carried a lot of that into the track in 2019. I went in knowing what was coming and not knowing whether that was good or bad. But I went into it not very fit. And I think there was possibly a little bit of overconfidence, having had a really good race in 2017. And, well, you were there, right? You experienced a lot of it. The wheels fell off in a big way. Even as early as day 1, I was having cramps and I was walking hills, whereas I was running everything in 17. And my mind really took a lot of work in 2019, because when you start to fall apart on day 1 and you already know what's coming for the next 8-9 days, it takes a lot to get up every morning and do that. I had bad, real nightmares, but during the day when I was running, I was sick for 24 hours. I couldn't eat or drink anything at all. And I think that was when we did like a 58 and a 64K day. I nearly stopped then. I got Ian Crafter kind of pulled me out of my funk and got me going, which was amazing. Just that support.
Because I think that's what is really beautiful with ultramarathon running is I think it definitely attracts personalities like you and I, and we can be very independent. Ultramarathon running can be very independent, particularly when it comes to training. It's a lot of alone time. It's a lot of isolation in training. And I think sometimes you forget that such an important part of your experience in endurance is the team around you, is the people around you. Could you share a little bit more on how Ian Crafter sort of helped you in that moment? Because I know that on that day, as you said, you were experiencing day nightmares, which I myself had no idea even what that was. You're obviously in quite a critical state in that moment.
Yeah, I think I got to the point where the doctor was looking at me and considering whether or not to pull me out. And I think that night I didn't put any protest up. But the next day I got out of bed trying to look sprightly and I think I'd lost so much weight and looked pretty gaunt, but was actually eating that he allowed me to continue. But when I got to one of the checkpoints, I thought I decided I was stopping. And I was running, I was running with someone who did stop at that point, but she'd ran, I think, 280 Ks with a broken arm. So she was allowed to stop.
Yeah, I remember her. She had a broken wrist. She ran that far with a broken wrist. Yeah.
And I was just beaten. I hadn't done anything wrong with my diet, and I certainly hadn't done anything wrong with my campcraft. I'm very, very clean on the run. So I think my mind had just got so beaten up that it made my body sick to try and stop me, is the only thing I can come to. I threw my bag down at the checkpoint and went into the woods that were kind of behind the vehicles of the checkpoint. And I was crying. I was upset with myself. I didn't want to not finish, but I didn't think I could go on. And I was kind of angry and frustrated that I turned up to a race having been so negligent with my training that I wasn't fit enough to be there. And then the realization that even if I did want to continue at this point, I probably hadn't left myself enough time with the state that I was in to get to the end within time. Ian, with his experience of racing, and I've run with him a lot as well in the past, he just gave me space to sort my own head out. And while I was out in the woods, he refilled my water bottles for me, put them back in my bag. And as I walked out of the woods, he didn't really even say anything to start with. He put my bag on my back with the full water and then said something like, you've got this, I'll see you at the end, and kind of guided me physically out of the checkpoint, which I'm very, very thankful for, because I did get to the end of that stage and I did get there in time. It was a long way, there's a lot of people who help you with all different things, like all of the race doctors, the crew, the other competitors, us being blown away in a tent while we were there. That's all stuff that takes the stress out of the race. But at the end of the day, the same with any other goal, all these people will help you. All these people will support you and encourage you. But the only person who can actually get you to the end is you. And that for me, then at that point in the track, is so powerful with everything else now as well. I want to build this business. There's loads of people who will help me. There's loads of people who will tell me how to do bits and pieces, but I'm the only one who can stand up on the stage and deliver my story or launch my business or launch my website. Whatever it is, I'm the only person who could do my bit. And that's what I got from the track. Well, and a long recovery time.
And with the depth then of your thoughts out there, did you, because I know some people find sort of going to that depth very cathartic, and sort of, you're saying obviously you didn't do a whole lot of training in the lead up to 2019.
Yeah.
Did you feel in moving forward from that experience in the track and sort of going to those, I guess, darker spaces that through that you sort of came into a more lightness in returning home?
Yeah, there was it taught me a lot, and it basically taught me a lot of things not to do. So again, it's one of those things where, I got to the end and I did finish the race. It was ugly. And so for me, it's not a failure. It's not a performance that I'm proud that I got to the end of it, but it's not something when someone says, what was your best race? That isn't it. What was your hardest race? That one. And what it did was, A, made me feel more comfortable about taking on challenges at home, but B, made me swear that I would never turn up to anything that underprepared again. Whether it's a race, an interview, an exam, a conversation, it's all now better prepared.
Yeah.
Because I turned around, I went to Mozambique to race 4 months after the track. And the first thing I did when I got back was got a coach to keep me accountable, to keep me consistent. And very different experience and outcome.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I think I certainly experienced a sort of similar pattern in the sense of when you identify as someone that is very strong in their mental fortitude, it's very easy to kind of do these things on your own, particularly when you have the planning like sort of laid out. But then you sort of come to realize that you can perform so much better and sort of endure so much more when you have that supportive network of people that are obviously highly, they're experts in their field as well.
Yeah. And that's, part of the framework that I think about when I'm coaching is, have that massive, crazy goal that sort of seems so unachievable, but that you really want and understand why you want it. And then just work out what the smaller parts are, and ultimately what the framework drives you to is share the idea with a whole bunch of people. And you're not sharing it because you want to show off. You're not sharing it because you want some kind of accolade or reinforcement from them. It's that you need that supportive group of people who, you go, okay, I'm going to run this far. And they're like, they firstly often look at me like I'm crazy or got three heads or something. But what happens then is, I go to pick my kids up from school and one person says, oh, how's your training going? How far have you run this week? Well, I don't want to sit there and go, well, actually, I didn't run this week and I've done no Ks. And, you want that kind of keeps you a little bit accountable. But that interest that the support provides also is really good motivation to be consistent with your preparation. And, people enjoy the journey as much as you do. It's just people are interested in other people in the kind of spaces that you want to live in. If they're not, it's the wrong space. But yeah.
And I know that you're someone that identifies as someone that's not necessarily always self-motivated, particularly when it comes to ultramarathon training, which does ask a lot of ourselves. Aside from getting a coach, say for the people that potentially cannot afford to get a coach at this point in time, are there strategies that you use that you can sort of just use on your own in terms of sort of being able to become a little bit more self-motivated than what you already are?
Yeah, I think, well, so sort of what I consider to be like a foundation for doing that. And it's like a foundation for life, which is they're real basics. And I use 5 pillars for supporting your mental health is how I put it, which basically, if you're protecting your mental health, then you're living a positive life. And if you're living a positive life, you're achieving things. And they are just around eating the right foods, proper sleep, drinking enough water, getting exercise, and whatever your self-care practice is. So what is it that gives you positive energy? What is it that feeds you day to day to keep you positive and driven? Now, that's kind of a stretch from ultra running, but the practices of, say, having a healthy diet, that can be difficult, but the steps to help you is make it as easy as you possibly can for yourself. So don't have packets of crisps or chips in the cupboard. Don't have chocolate. Don't have ice cream in the freezer. So that when you stand up, if you're working from home and you stand up from your desk and you go to the kitchen, that food isn't there for you. At the beginning of the week, plan what you're going to eat so that when it comes to Tuesday lunchtime, you're not going, oh, what am I going to eat? I'm really starving. Oh, I'm just going to eat the bag of chips. And then what you've planned to eat for the week, you can also shop for the week. So then it's in the cupboard, or you can make it on Sunday afternoon and it's ready for you in the fridge. Those things are what keep you consistent and what make living well easy for you. And if I take that to training for an ultra or training for anything else, if at the beginning of the week, you know that you've got to exercise Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday, you've booked in your half an hour or your 1 hour in your diary, and you've arranged to meet your friend to walk with or to run with or to go to the gym with, all of those things, you're going to turn up because you don't want to let the person down. It's in your diary, so you've blocked out the time. You know, it's about putting together a schedule that you will not drop out of. And once it becomes routine, once it becomes a habit, you know, you do it naturally. Sunday afternoon, sit down for half an hour. Where are my 4 exercise spots for the week? And what am I going to do? So that when I wake up at 7 o'clock on Sunday morning or Tuesday morning, I look at my diary. Oh, I'm going for a run for an hour and I'm doing 10Ks and it's with this person. I'm going to go. If I wake up and I've got nothing planned, I've got to run for some distance sometime today on my own and it's raining, when am I going to fit it in? Well, It happens on Wednesday or Thursday if you're lucky. So there's ways of putting, you know, in my experience, ways of putting together a plan that help you move forward without buying a coach.
Right. So make a plan and make a plan with people seems to be the way to go. Yeah. I certainly agree. So in coming to more of an updated version of Jamie, this year, obviously sort of the past year and a bit has been different for all involved in any sort of sport because events haven't been going ahead because of COVID. I've noticed that you've been quite creative in this aspect and you're planning your own event. Can you talk to me a little bit about the Hard Way Home?
Yeah. Okay. So the Hard Way Home, as you alluded to, has come about because of travel restrictions principally. So the 5 continent series that I was involved with, or the Continental Challenge, is all overseas, with the exception of the track here in Northern Territory. So they aren't available to travel to. So I've decided I decided earlier in the year that I'm going to run from Coburn on the South Australia border back to Bondi Beach. So it's the hard way home because I'll be driven out there, but no one's going to drive me back. It's 1,100 Ks. And I was due to go in April. Actually, I was due to go on April the 1st over the Easter period and run back. But I had some issues kind of with support teams and logistics. So I'm now planning on going out on around the 19th of September. We'll drive 2 vehicles out there and they will support me as I run back. I'm going to be doing 2 marathons a day for the duration until I get back to Bondi. And the idea of 2 marathons a day is that people around the country can join in with one of the marathons, either physically or virtually. You know, they can run a marathon wherever they live and raise money for that. And I'm doing that for the Australian Childhood Foundation, that I've been raising money for a little while. And that's what the Continental Challenge was going to be used for. So yeah, raising money for them and just hoping that other people can kind of get behind it, motivate themselves to run a marathon or a half marathon or a 10K, raise some money, and all go towards the Australian Childhood Foundation. Yeah, it's a big challenge. I won't have to carry anything, which will be quite nice, but it is, 2 tracks back to back. So 1,100 Ks.
It's outrageous.
Thank you.
And that's coming from someone that runs long distances. No, but very admirable. I'd love to know, besides obviously such an important cause, fundraising for the Australian Childhood Foundation, which I truly honour you for, what is your why besides doing it for charity? What is your internal why?
So you've already said outright that I'm not very good at training for ultramarathons.
Is that what I said outright?
Pretty much. No, so there's a bit of truth behind that. And it's not really that I'm bad at training for ultramarathons. It's that I'm not very self-disciplined. So I'm kind of externally disciplined. So if I tell everyone I'm doing something, then I kind of feel like I should. And I'm not very good at training for something that's a long way away. So I kind of do races in between to kind of keep myself going, basically. And that's this one is going to take a lot of training, but it's a big event, and to keep myself going when all of the other stuff has been cancelled, that's really my why. Because I feel like if I don't go and do something big, I'm not going to run, and if I don't run, there's going to come a point where I actually can't really get back to where I was, and I don't want to give it up. I really enjoy the people that I run with. I run now with the Raidlight team here in Australia, and that's becoming like a family. Alex is great running that, and we just have a huge amount of fun. And I only get to participate in that because I'm part of the running community, and this is my way of keeping me going in that space. While the other challenges that I really want to do aren't available. So it's, there is a big self part of it.
And with it being 1,100 kilometers, because I think this is what really stands out for me. You could run another 500 kilometer, which is extremely big still in itself. Like why 1,100 kilometers?
Well, it came about because at the time when I was looking at this, with the COVID travel restrictions, even the borders were closed. So it wasn't, there was like races going on in Queensland, or there was races in South Australia or in Western Australia, and I couldn't even go to those. So I was like, well, what's the biggest thing that I can possibly do that they can't shut down? If they close the borders, it's not going to matter. I'm traveling on foot through outback roads. Are they going to stop me from doing that? And it basically came to, maybe I'll run from Broken Hill to Bondi, because I kind of like the sounds of that. And that was 1,050 Ks. And then I realized that Broken Hill is only 50 Ks from the border. So I thought, well, let's just run the whole width of New South Wales. So we're still in the state, but that's probably the longest, I could do in one direction. Obviously I could run around the state, but I haven't got 3 months to run.
I love how calmly you keep saying these things.
Yeah. Well, there's more and more every time. So that's where it came from. And it happened that the route that I want to run is 1,100 Ks. Mm-hmm. So there was yeah.
And do you feel like with your trajectory in running, is it going to continually be larger than sort of the last thing that you've done?
It looks like that, doesn't it?
It does.
No, there's some key races around that I want to really get involved in. I want to finish the Continental Challenge. So I've ran Mozambique. I've ran the Northern Territory. So I've got Vietnam, Bolivia, and Norway still to tick off that list. There's a couple of big races I'd like to do in the US. There's a race that I want to do in New Zealand. There's a couple of races I want to do in New Zealand. And then I'm hoping, though, this year to wrap off the year with Costa Kosciuszko, if I can get in. So I'd really like to run that. It's been on the cards for quite a long time. And I feel like this year would be a good one to go and do it. So,
because all the ones you've mentioned, I have absolutely no doubt that you're very confident in finishing them. How do you feel about going into the space of the unknown? Obviously, you've never ran 1,100 kilometers before. It's almost double sort of what you've done. How are you feeling in terms of confidence going into something like this?
I feel pretty confident because it's not a race. So in a way, with 2 marathons a day, I can take as long over the marathons as I need. So assuming there's no injury, I feel quite comfortable that I can do that. And if the marathons are taking me 7 hours each towards the end, then I'm going to be running for 14 or 15 hours for the day. But it's not like there's a cutoff in a race. It's not, it's not like I've got to finish every one of them in 4 hours or 3.5 hours or anything. So that's giving me quite a lot of comfort. And then I'm also already at this point not really thinking about it as 1100 Ks. I'm thinking about it as 2 marathons a day. And I do that for a day and then I forget about them and I get up the next morning, 2 marathons today, put them in the bag, forget about them, go to bed and get up the next day. So I'm already mentally making it a smaller challenge. I don't know what it'll look like. It might end up being 100 meters running, 100 meters walking, but I'm going through that cutting the goal process down already, so that I don't overwhelm myself and panic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I know that the last time we spoke, you were going to be taking your 2 younger daughters on this journey.
Yeah.
What is a lesson that you would love them to learn, being able to be part of such a huge experience for their dad?
The same lesson I try and teach them all the time. If you want something enough and you understand why you want it, then you'll be prepared to put in the work to get it. They've been out to the Simpson Desert with me before for a race. And day to day, they see me go out for a run and I go and run around the eastern suburbs or I go up to the Blue Mountains and run, but they don't put any of that into context. When they see an event from start to finish over 1100 Ks and they're sitting in a car driving for 12 days or whatever, that kind of puts into context and perspective the effort that I put in training. And that's what I want them to really take away from it.
It's beautiful. So on a final note, Jamie, I would love to ask you, what does it mean to you, Jamie, to be human?
It means to me that we're all part of the same thing. With my running, it's always been about community. Being human means we're all part of the community. We all enjoy living on the earth. We should all be treated the same, be aware of each other's similarities, differences, but overall each other's humanity, and treat everybody the way that you want to be treated yourself. I don't think there's enough of that around in the world. And you just look at some people in some places and then remember that everybody's human and should all be treated the same. And I'd like to see that happen.
Thank you for listening to the wonderful Jamie Hildage. A question for reflection that this conversation has inspired me to ask myself is, am I living consciously? Am I living in a way that is intentional, or am I simply meandering through life? Please rate, review, subscribe, share with friends and family, and become part of the To Be Human collective.